Previously, I showed how I experimented growing basil from seed in crazy and wacky ways. As they matured into seedlings, the time came to plant them in their definitive spot before summer weather hit full on. Because it has warmed up over the past weeks, the basil has responded well, and it's time to start planting. There's a lot of stuff that I need to put in the ground just to make sure that everything gets up to an early start and is able to develop its roots before the summer heat actually kicks in. When growing basil, remember that they are tender perennials, although we usually treat them as annuals. I try to locate the basil in the sunniest spots I can and warmest spots. They prefer a very balmy climate. I think cold is one of the worst things for basil. It just makes them stop growing. Of course, too much heat is also bad because they bolt. So you need perfect temperature all the time if you want a lot of basil growing. I feel that basil can be sometimes a bit temperamental when it comes to establishing itself. Many times it will quickly love its new place and explode with growth, but sometimes it just sits there until it decides to die. While we usually grow basil from seed, it can be propagated by cuttings. If you put cuttings in a cup of water, they will develop roots. That is why I usually don't worry too much with transplant shock, and even divide up root balls that have more than one plant to give them more room to grow. As long as I keep the soil moist, in the first week while it establishes the new roots, it usually survives. I believe that stunting in growth that sometimes happens is more likely due to temperature. Basil loves warm weather, and it cannot tolerate cold. Any frost will completely kill the plant. For that reason, those of us in temperate climates with sub-freezing winter temperatures must plan accordingly to maximize basil output. Start them indoors as early as you can with the aid of artificial lights, and be careful never to shock them with cold weather as you harden them off. Anything under 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 Celsius is sure to stunt their growth. Basil loves water, so they smile when summer brings in the thunderstorms. Planting right after a thunderstorm has the disadvantage of actually getting your hands all muddy. But that's why you have a boxwood, and you thought this was just ornamental. It's like my outdoor sink for easy gardening cleanup without having to go inside. Growing herbs is an imperative. There is no good reason not to have herbs in your garden or even windowsill. Basil is an easy to grow essential in your cast of characters for flavor, but there is another king of herbs which is very versatile in the kitchen. Growing it is slightly different, however. I oftentimes forget to plant one of the most basic herbs, parsley. So this time I can't forget, and I'm going to plant it directly. The thing is, it doesn't really like to be transplanted. It likes to grow where it was sown, much like cilantro. But the good thing about this is that it actually is a biennial, so it gives you leaves to cut the whole year without flowering, and then the next year you can still harvest a lot of it and retard its flowering. It's one thing that everybody should plant at home, even though it's easy to find in the supermarket. It just makes your life easier if you just go outside whenever you're out of parsley, fresh parsley, and you just cut it and use it. Of course, fresh parsley is very different from dry parsley. It's a new flavor experience. I recommend planting it. The main difference in cultivating parsley is that it is better to sow it directly where you mean to have it grow. While you can buy ready-to-plant seedlings or raise your own from seeds in pots and then transplant it outdoors when the time comes, in my experience, parsley performs better when sown directly on the ground. That is because they have a central taproot that is best left undisturbed throughout its life. I recommend sowing them as soon as the soil can be worked in early spring. Coming up in the next block, I share some other perennial herbs I like to have around and show what happened to the basil right after this commercial. If you enjoyed the videos and would like to support the channel, you can purchase an original painting or drawing in my Etsy shop, or become a patron in my Patreon. There is another herb I like to have around in my garden, even if it doesn't always want to be here. That is rosemary. I'm planting rosemary again because my rosemary bush died, and that's usually what happens around here in Maryland. You can't really be certain that it's gonna overwinter naturally without being covered, without any extra precautions. We're just in the edge of where it's hardy, and when a winter is just too cold, it dies. So I bought a new start, and now I'm gonna transplant it in the same place because this is the only place that I can actually get it to overwinter in milder winters because it's the sunniest spot and it has good, well-draining soil. So those are the things you want to look out for when planting rosemary. Rosemary is traditionally a warm weather bush. It is hardy up to US hardiness zone 8. People in California may be laughing at me right now, considering how easy it is to grow the bush in the Mediterranean-like climate. The secret to growing rosemary in the edge of its hardiness zone, such as in my Zone 7 garden, is microclimate. Choosing a very sunny south-facing spot that is also sheltered by a heat bank, like a stone wall, is ideal. The soil must also be very well draining. It will not tolerate soggy soils, especially during winter. Since I live in the north-facing side of a river valley, I struggle overwintering my rosemary bushes. When we have mild winters, they grow without an incident, but unusually cold snaps like the recent polar vortexes is sure to seal its doom. Another thing to consider is getting a more cold-tolerant modern variety. Plant breeders have developed varieties that are said to be cold-tolerant up to zone 6 or even 5, such as the Alcacade or Blue Arp varieties. Even so, it is a good idea to try to shelter them during winter, or planting them in a container that can be brought indoors, such as I have done with rosemary and bay leaf, another herb that cannot tolerate the cold. Just a few weeks after I had planted out the basil, they were showing promising signs of growth. We were experiencing lots of rain and temperatures in the 70s and 80s, which meant those were perfect conditions for the basil to develop. As summer established itself with abundant grapevines embowering the garden gate, I could already foresee how much basil leaves these plants would produce. They were showing no signs of stress even as I had separated their root balls when planting. I had also added more layers of plant litter and grass clippings as mulch every other week. This would certainly give them a nutrient boost and shelter their developing roots during sunny days. I had given them a great head start by growing the seedlings early in the year. Now that the weather was perfect for their development, they would thrive. I even managed to plant several starts on the edge of the property, underneath the grapevines, to take advantage of the sun exposure there. My goal was to create a ground covering of basil to the grapevine canopy overhead. Fortunately, basil is not a plant groundhogs seem to be interested in nibbling at all. I believe it's due to its strong flavor. That allows me more freedom to plant them around in the garden, without running the risk of waking up to mere stalks where healthy leafed-out plants used to stand. Summer marched on as the grapes developed their clusters of fruit. I believe few plants are as charming as grapevines in fruit. Soon enough, the growing season reached its apex, and the garden was decked with its crowning glory, an exuberant garland of flowers bursting in vitality. To take full advantage of the abundant basil and to keep it producing longer, I got a large basket inside and went about harvesting the growing shoots from the basil plants. I would allow them to dry to capture this intoxicating summer essence to be used during bleaker times of the year. Humble hearts, caring hands, willing to come together not as foes but friends. How can we learn to love one another? How can we serve as roots to feed each other? It is essential to keep harvesting basil every couple of days, breaking off the growing tips to create bushier plants and to prevent the plants from bolting. Once the plants start producing flowers, their flavor changes a bit and they can become more bitter. When will we heal the troubles that we inherit When will we share the fruit of the land? Humble hearts, caring hands, willing to come together, not as foes, but friends. How can we learn to love one another? How can we serve as roots to feed each other? Leaving our fears to the past, will leave our dreams. I was able to dry several batches of basil leaves for storage, and the bushes produced abundantly until late fall, when they inevitably started to send out flower stalks. But this certainly had been a good year for growing basil.